It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. And you know, with me, you just never know where that neighborhood may actually be. Today, that neighborhood is Split, Croatia. And I find my way on the path from my apartment that I'm renting down to a guided tour. I'm going to take a guided tour of Split. And the guided tour is going to take us around what's called the palace. So we're going to go walk around the palace with a tour guide. And then later on, I will venture into some of the featured attractions, if you will, like the basement of the palace or the cathedral. Those aren't included in the tour. But we're going to go walk around the palace with the tour guide, and I'll bring you along. Now, as I do, just give you an idea as to what the neighborhood looks like. So this is the neighborhood. At least the neighborhood insofar as where I am staying. My apartment is just up the way over there, and rather a nice area. If you're going to stay in Split, it's nice to stay right in the old town, if you will. So first thing on the agenda, though, is to grab myself a bite to eat. And there are no shortages of little places to grab a bite to eat here in Split. Now, I am actually outside the palace. The palace is all of a minute or two walking distance from where I'm staying. In fact, if I point the camera over there, you can actually see the tower, I believe, of one of four towers that is part of the palace. But right now I'm going to go grab myself a bite to eat, and then I'll be back here in just a bit. Okay, so the tour's actually started. I found my way here into the palace, and this is my tour guide. Well, this isn't my tour guide, but this is Dora. She is associated with the company, and here. Thank you. Hello. Okay, so there's the tour guide. And
opposite of the Mausoleum, over here was the religious quarter. Romans were gods. The main god of those was Jupiter, god of thunder. And this was his temple. It's still standing here today, and we'll see it later in the tour. To the south, this entire part of the palace was the royal quarter, where the emperor, his family, and their personal guards lived. In this south wall, these large arches, large windows, that was the emperor's walkway. He had a fantastic view of the sea and the islands through those windows over there. And we'll see later on how it used to look like and how it looks like today. Next, we'll go from here onto the central square of peristyle over there. Do you have any questions before we go? Okay, follow me.
alright, so I'm going to do my best with this tour. We will see how it comes out. It's always a little bit tricky. It's a little bit windy today, and I misplaced what's called my dead cat, which covers the microphone and the wind. But here we are inside the tour, and the gentleman we're going up to, I think it's going up to the cathedral here. We're at the square, the main square of the palace.
Peristyle, peristylos, in Latin means in between the columns, because the square was built with these pillars surrounding it. It was also nicknamed the Royal Square because it was the entrance to the royal quarters. The emperor loved to come out onto the balcony over there, look at his people, his subjects in the square. And he would greet the people. They had to prostrate themselves in front of him. They had to kneel down, put their head on the floor, and spread their arms wide. That wasn't how Romans bowed to emperors. This is how Egyptians bowed to pharaohs. Egypt at that time was part of the Roman Empire, and Diocletian liked Egypt so much he proclaimed himself pharaoh. Because pharaohs ruled Egypt, and at that time he ruled Egypt. But also pharaohs were worshipped as gods. And Diocletian was even more of an egomaniac, even more than other Roman emperors. And he considered himself the son of Jupiter, son of the main god, and he wanted to be worshipped as God. So it all went hand in hand with him being up there. He imported more than just that worshipping position from Egypt. He took some of Egyptian architecture as well into the palace that he was building at the time. So over 300 columns that could be found throughout the palace were all imported from Egypt, along with 12 Egyptian sphinxes. Just one of the 12, but it is Diocletian took them from the tomb of an ancient pharaoh, Moses III, who lived 3,500 years ago. Meaning the sphinxes are more than twice as old as the palace, which is only 1,700 years old. Only. All the 12 sphinxes were placed around the square, between the columns. In Egypt, sphinxes were guardians to the pharaoh's tombs, and over here they were guardians to the pharaoh's home, in addition to his tomb. Mausoleum was built as the biggest building in the palace because Diocletian wanted to show to everyone that even in death he was still above everyone else. And during his rule, Diocletian wanted to be worshipped as a god. Most of the Romans were okay with that. They had hundreds of gods anyways, so what's one more god to them? But Christians only had one god, and it was not Diocletian, so they refused to worship him. And he couldn't have that. To make an example out of them, Diocletian started persecuting them, hunting, torturing, and killing. During his rule, thousands of Christians lost their lives like that. But things eventually turned around. When Diocletian retired, he lived here for 11 years, and 1 year after he died, Tetrarchy fell apart. The four rulers started fighting among themselves, and the winner of that Tetrarchy war was Constantine, who we know today as Constantine the Great, the first Roman emperor to become Christian, and the emperor who made Christianity the main religion of Rome. The main reason why Constantine was able to become emperor is Tetrarchy. He was one of the four emperors when it fell apart. So Diocletian, the last great enemy of the Christians, invented Tetrarchy, and therefore started a chain of events which would result in Christianity taking over the empire. Pretty ironic. Anyway, that was all in late.
Right, so as I mentioned, you do the best you can on these tours, and it's a lot of history. Definitely a lot of history to know. Here's a couple Roman soldiers here, that are entertaining the crowd. So we're going to go in. This Sphinx right here actually is, oh God, it must be twice as old as this palace. So to think of that is really something else. So now we're going down into the basement here. I guess this is called the basement, if you will. And this is it's just filled with all types of different souvenir shops and what have you. And you can actually pay to go and take a tour of not a tour of the basement, but you can pay to go inside the parts of the basement here. So I'm just gonna kind of follow the tour here and give you a nice view. It's really, really something else. Look at these ceilings here. To think that this is third century is really something else. Look at those ceilings.
Crowds from the cruise ships. We'll hear. Yep. Yeah. Okay. So these are the basements, or the cellars. When the palace was built, it was built on an incline. The north part of the palace was built on the ground over there on the hill, but down here we had the beach and the sea. The basements were built as a foundation for the south part of the palace to level it with the north part, but also to reclaim the land over here. After the palace was built, the basements were used for storage of food, wine and equipment. But in the 7th century, when the people from Salona started living up there, they didn't want to live underground and they had nothing to store over here. So instead, they closed off the basements and made holes in the ceilings like this one. And people above started using those holes as toilets. So right now we are standing in one big sewage pit. Since the basements were closed, that sewage had nowhere to go. And over the centuries it just piled up, almost to the ceilings. Which is one of the reasons why Split had 13 black plagues throughout history. 13 bubonic plagues. You're lucky we're still alive to be able to tell you that. After World War II, a group of archaeologists came from USA, from Minnesota. They opened up the basements and started excavating over here. That sewage was dried up and petrified at the time, so to them it was just dirt, smelly dirt. What they found out was the sewage actually preserved the stones. Almost all the stones around us are 1700 years old. In pretty good condition considering their age and considering what surrounded them. And the black stones up above, that is where the sewage didn't reach. That is how everything down here could have looked. So maybe those plagues were kinda worth it. I'm kidding. Let's go a bit further.
All right, so on we go in the tour of the basement here. I'm trying to hand carry the microphone so I can catch both his audio and mine. I think if I'm not mistaken, the area is up on the ceiling where you see the black. That's where the sewage was, or the crap, if you will. And there's a hole in the ceiling that was the toilet. I'm going to turn around and give you a nice view here. So there's a nice view. Okay, so now we're going to head out here. Let's see if I can.
Alright, so the sewage in the basements had another beneficial effect. No one wanted to come in here, walk through sewage to do any remodeling. So the entire construction of the basements is the original one from when the palace was built. And Romans had something called copy architecture. When they would make a construction, they would first make the foundation, in this case the basements, and then they would copy the layout of the foundation on the floor above. So every single room in the basements, had a copy of it directly above. And today, even though the buildings up there are completely different, by looking at the basements we know how the palace used to look like. That hallway that we passed through, the copy of that hallway up above was the entrance hallway into the royal quarters. The copy of this one, directly above it, was the emperor's walkway. That place, and this is the south wall, so up there were those windows through which the emperor had a fantastic view. This way and to the right we have the largest chamber in the basements, the copy of which up above was the emperor's throne room, next to which were his living quarters, and on the opposite side were dining hall and 3 kitchens. Now a bit of Game of Thrones stuff. That largest chamber in the basements was the dragon dungeon. That is where the dragons were imprisoned. But it also doubles as Daenerys' throne room. You don't recognize that it was filmed in the same room as the dungeon because they changed it completely. And this way, and to the left, we have a hallway where Sir Barristan Selmy and Grey Worm were ambushed by the Sons of the Harpy. If you remember that fight scene, yeah. Those are the 2 main locations we don't see on the tour, because to see them we have to buy additional tickets to see the basement. But the locations up above we will see on the tour. And later on, if you really want to see those, you can come visit later. But one more thing before we go. Do you guys recognize these rings? This is the ring that Daenerys wore. The one that she dropped before the Dothraki kidnapped her on the mountain. Anyway, when it was being filmed here, the producer liked these rings so much, he bought a few of them and gave one to Emilia Clarke for the shooting. The rings are really cheap because this is just polished limestone, and limestone is everywhere around. But it has special value to the fans. Alright, so now we'll go out of the palace to the south gate, the bronze gate.
They're really a good tour.
So, this is how the palace looks like today. Quite different to what we've seen on the picture over there. Right now we're over here, we can see the south wall of this corner tower over there. In the 7th century, when the people from Salona started living over here, in the palace, there was much more of them than the current buildings accommodate. So they had to do some remodeling. They replaced big Roman buildings and wide streets with hundreds of smaller houses and small alleyways that we still have today. Of the old palace, only a few parts still remain. Peristyle Square, Emperor's Mausoleum, entrance lobby into the royal quarters, Temple of Jupiter, 3 walls and 3 corner towers, and also the basements. Everything else was changed or is gone. In the 15th century, the palace reached its limit. No more buildings could be built within the palace walls, so the people had to expand the city out of the walls, and they did it to the west, over the western wall. At that time, Split fell under the rule of the Venetian Republic, and this part of the city was built in Venetian style. Pretty different compared to this medieval style over here. The Venetians started fortifying the city even more, because these walls were old and they only protected half of the city. So they built a few layers of new walls all around the city. And these were the outer walls, these ramparts. Thanks to those ramparts that surrounded the entire city, the city was never conquered by the Ottoman Empire, who roamed the countryside here and actually pushed all the way to the sea before they were pushed back to the border. And those ramparts were demolished in the 19th century because they became obsolete.
Okay, so as the tour continues, I am going to share some of the waterfront with you, if you will. I'm not sure if this is called the promenade, but perhaps it is. It's actually a beautiful day, and to go on tour of places like Split in the autumn or perhaps the spring, so much better than the summer months when it's hot and just crowded full with tourists. So we'll continue on with the tour and see what's next in store for us. So this tour, they split it up. You can either take the short tour or you can take a longer tour. I opted for the shorter tour, which is primarily the palace, and the longer tour, if I'm not mistaken, actually takes you outside of the palace into other parts of Split.
Throughout the south wall of the palace, today we can see a unique combination of ancient Roman architecture and modern apartments. Something that we can't find almost anywhere else in the world, except other ancient cities, Rome or Jerusalem, for example. Over here is where the last corner tower used to be, where the palace ends. Everything after that is the expanded part of the city, the Venetian part. The promenade that we are standing on didn't exist until the 19th century. Before that, the sea came almost to the wall. But in the 19th century, the French occupied this territory, and you know how the French love their promenades. So they built a beautiful one over here, which was renovated and remodeled 11 years ago into what we have today. That hill over there is called Marianne. It's a forest park protected by UNESCO. Halfway up the hill you can find a beautiful viewpoint from which you can see a beautiful panoramic view of the city and the countryside around the city. So that's one place that I would suggest that you visit while the weather is nice. And it's pretty easy to reach, just 10 to 15 minutes up some stairs. So, yeah. questions? Okay, let's go this way.
All right, so we're walking along the promenade. As I was correct, and he was saying this used to be actually waterfront here, and the French came in and decided to make this a promenade. So I'll continue on with the tour. If I'm not mistaken, also he's telling me that these are apartments, part of the wall here. Look at that. Croatians are really, really wonderful people coming to learn and appreciate.
Okay, this square is called the Fruit Square because the fruit market used to be here, and the name still stands. The Venetians ruled over the city and over the coast from the 15th to the 19th century. When they were doing good, they were investing in us. They helped build the other half of the city. They built those fortifications all around the city, and this citadel was part of those fortifications. It had cannons on it, and it served to protect the harbor from Ottoman and pirate ships. But the Venetians didn't really invest in our infrastructure. So the people here were living in the Middle Ages for a few centuries longer than the rest of Europe. In the 19th century, the Venetian Republic was defeated and dismantled by Napoleon. Then the French conquered all the Venetian territories. When they came to split, they were horrified and disgusted because it was the 19th century and we were still living like in the Middle Ages. Throwing sewage in the basements was kind of the good part, because the other parts of the city didn't have basements, and the people over there were throwing sewage in the streets. So the French came here not to exploit us, but to educate us. They helped. They implemented public schooling, taught us about hygiene, sewers, graveyards. They helped clean up the city, and they built the beautiful promenade. In those 8 years, while the French were here, are considered a golden age of our history. In just 8 years, they did more for us than the Venetians did in 3 to 4 centuries. 4 centuries, actually. But after 8 years, Napoleon sold this coast to the Austrians. So the French had to leave, and the Austrians came here instead. And they were here until World War I. So for some 90 more years. We'll get to that. This is a statue of Marko Marulic, or Marcus Marulus. He was a Croatian poet who lived in ancient times. At that time, all the books of the Romans were written in Italian, and he was the first guy to write a book in Croatian. So he is remembered as the father of Croatian literature. The statue was made by Ivan Meštrović, our most famous sculptor, whose biggest statue we will see on the Northgate. Okay, any questions before I move on? Righty then, follow me. When the city expanded to the west, the people didn't destroy the western wall of the palace. They incorporated it in the new buildings. And we can find pieces of the western wall throughout the buildings, throughout these buildings towards the north. But if you want to see them, you have to look inside of bars and restaurants. Right. Over here, the people built the first church outside of the palace walls. They made this arch, put some walls, put an altar under the arch, and they named the church Saint Michael by the Sea, because the sea level came almost to the western wall at the time as well. So this church was on the beach. Only in the Venetian times was this land reclaimed. Today, though, instead of a church, we have a pub with a traditional Croatian name of La Bodega, which isn't Croatian in Spanish, I'm just kidding. And during football or soccer games, we have a different kind of altar under the arch, a TV.
Does Croatia have a good football team?
I'd like to think so.
Yeah.
corner into the southwestern part of the palace, where the emperor's personal quarters used to be.
Alright, so we're continuing on with the tour. It's actually wonderful that he is receptive to being filmed and doing the video. Really, really is nice.
1950s when the Splits football fan club was founded. Yeah. And 1911, that's the second most popular year that will be on the walls. That's when the football club itself was founded.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, football is pretty important to the people here.
Yeah.
Apparently.
Well, you did well this time.
Yeah. All right, so.
Want to say anything more about that? Beat us.
Yes, I know.
When the Venetians were here, they built beautiful palaces throughout the city. This here is one such palace. Decorated gateway with a family crest up above, beautiful courtyard, and noble houses were in there. Let's go in.
Come on, MTV. Look at the Margaret.
Most of those Venetian palaces today are galleries and museums, but this one instead is a club called the Ghetto. Alright, so Austrians were here until World War I, then we became part of Kingdom of Yugoslavia, and Yugoslavia became a socialist republic at the end of World War II. New apartment buildings were built throughout the city at the time. New modern homes where everyone could live in, except for the poorest. The poorest had to live where no one else wanted to. In the old palace, the old town. That's when the palace itself got the nickname Ghetto, because the unwanted were walled off in their own quarter. Anyway, we've seen it. Let's go where it's a bit less noisy.
Okay, we're going down an alley that was popularized, or not popularized, but in the Game of Thrones here. There's a famous scene, I guess, in the Game of Thrones where this alley was filmed. Rather a narrow alley to be sure. Look at that. Okay. So on with the tour.
Because in this alley, we tend to have terrorist pigeons. If you stand in the open for too long, they will drop a bomb on you. So underneath the ceiling over here, we're safe. This alley is interesting because this is where one of the rooms in the emperor's quarters were, his library. Notice that arch at the end of the alley. Imagine it when it was intact. The arch made an entire full semicircle. So the room was much bigger than just this one alley. And we know that by looking at the room in the basement. Today, this is a good example of how the layout of the palace was changed in the Middle Ages. The people replaced that big room with a small alley and small houses all around. But we can still find pieces of ancient Roman architecture throughout the palace. For example here, these bricks and mortar, are 1700 years old. This is one part of the wall of that room. We can find it throughout this wall here. It was followed by the new building, and now it's part of the wall of that. And that arch over there now serves as a balcony for the house above. So throughout the palace we can find pieces of ancient Roman architecture, only repurposed, today serving a different function than originally. And the biggest example of that is, of course, the Mausoleum, now the cathedral.
Okay, I believe now we're going into the Mausoleum, if I'm not mistaken. Let's take a look. It's going to be...
As you can imagine, this is the entrance lobby into the royal quarters.
The entrance to the royal quarters.
Had to wait here before being allowed to see him. Because of that, this room was decorated. The walls were completely covered with mosaics, from the floor to the ceiling. And back then the room did have a domed ceiling. So anyone who had to wait here couldn't help but be awed and intimidated by the emperor even before they got to meet him. Who else but a god can afford such a grand room just to be his entrance lobby, his vestibule? Today though, most of those mosaics are gone. In the Middle Ages, people didn't care for them, so they just fell apart, along with the ceiling, which was really difficult to maintain. Even though we have just the skeleton of the room now, because of the good acoustics, throughout the day you can hear a bunch of guys singing here. What they're singing is called klapa, traditional Dalmatian type of singing, a cappella. Right now they're taking a break, but later on you might be able to hear them. Or you might have heard them.
Would you sing for us, please?
Oh no, I've been talking for too long, so I lost my singing voice. Although they do end their break when big cruise ship groups show up, so if you guys really want to hear them, we can wait over here, they'll sing in 2 minutes. In the meantime, for you Game of Thrones fans, there were 2 scenes over here. An earlier scene, earlier in Marine before the slaughter began, a few unsullied soldiers were standing off with spears, having a standoff with Sons of the Harpy with their knives. And they were just standing off, having a standoff, and the Sons of the Harpy ran.
Fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
So, these arches again are restorations of them. How the Emperor's Walkway looked like. But in the Middle Ages, people didn't want such windows, such openings in the walls. They needed the palace, they needed the city to be a fortress. And it's not much of a fortress if they have huge holes in the walls. So on the south wall, which was the safe wall, they just made small windows, which could easily be closed down and barricaded in case of an attack. But on the other 3 walls, these arches were completely covered, completely closed, and we'll see how that looks like on the north wall near the end of the part of the tour. Now let's go on this way.
Alright, I think we're nearing the end of the tour.
15 minutes. In World War II, Split was bombed, both by the Axis and the Allies. And this part was demolished in the bombings. This part of the palace, along with plenty of other parts of the city, but we won't get to see that. Since this part was never rebuilt, we were instead able to build this room here, or at least this half of a room. It was built as a historic replica by copying the room in the basement, copy architecture. And this is how the Emperor's dining hall was constructed, because the dining hall was over here. The Emperor had a large marble table in the center of the room. That table we can find in the City Museum today. In these 4 alcoves were 4 statues of the 4 emperors, tetrarchy, and also 3 kitchens surrounded the dining hall. Here, there, and there, probably without those ancient Roman graffiti. In the Roman Empire, the rich Romans, emperors and politicians usually had a specific room close to the dining halls. A room that we nicknamed vomitorium. You see, when they would eat, they wouldn't stop when they are full. They would eat until they were sick, then they would go to the vomitorium, vomit everything out, freshen up, and come back to do it all over again. Sometimes, several times a meal. They did that because they were hedonists. They liked eating much more than they could possibly digest. But also, it was a show of power and show of wealth. Those less wealthy than them couldn't afford to eat or to waste so much food. So to the rich Romans, bulimia wasn't an issue. And that's why one royal family of 3 needed 3 kitchens around the dining hall. Let's go on.
Alright, now we're heading toward the Temple of Jupiter here in the palace in Split. Looks like here's another sphinx that didn't fare so well, you can see.
So, this is one of the 3 lucky sphinxes, one of the 2 lucky sphinxes who were only decapitated. But at least they survived, kind of. Anyway, behind the Sphinx we have the Temple of Jupiter. You can come closer if you want. When the Christians came into the palace, they started using the Emperor's tomb as a cathedral. But they also needed some place to baptize people. Baptism at the time was done by complete immersion under the water, and only adults were baptized. So they needed enough room for a man-sized pool. The cathedral was too crowded for that because they held mass over there. So instead, they came into the Temple of Jupiter, put the pool in there, and they renamed the temple into Baptistry of St. John. Today you can still find a pool in there, although it's no longer filled with holy water. Now it's filled with donation money. When you look down into it, you'll feel like Scrooge McDuck about to dive into his pile of money. Also in there you can find a statue of John the Baptist, another statue made by Ivan Meštrović. And these carvings around the gates, they were made when the temple was made, when the palace was built. On them you can see the different Roman gods, but besides them also little angels and different kinds of animals eating grapes from a vine. All of that represents the unity and prosperity that Diocletian brought to the empire during his rule. Before he became emperor, emperors were assassinated left and right, so the emperor was unstable. He put a stop to the assassinations, he stabilized the empire, improved prosperity, and when Diocletian retired, he left the empire in a fantastic state. He was definitely the greatest emperor of the 3rd century and would have been of 4th as well, but Constantine lived in the 4th century and he won by the Christians liked him much more. Alright, next we'll go through here, this small passage which is called Let Me Pass. It's so narrow.
Okay, continuing on, he pointed out the narrowness of this passageway. It's really just narrow enough for one person to go through. Probably be tough for Skip Smith to go through. He'd probably have Skip Smith of the villages in Florida. He'd have to probably squeeze through that small passageway, I would imagine. Okay, so let's continue on with the tour.
Come closer, please. Alright. Let's see who was paying attention in class. Who remembers the name of the east-west street of the palace?
This is the east-west.
Yes.
What you're saying. Did you tell us the name? I don't
I
think
did.
so.
No, he said a name, but just I just assumed it was in Croatia.
Decumanus. Because in the Legion it separated the 9th from the 10th Legion. That's also separated the south and north part of the camp. But the name still stands. The name was taken also for the cities as well. Anyway, as punishment for not remembering, you now have to finish the rest of the tour. You could have gone home early. Anyway, so this is the Kimono Street, and this is the Western Gate, the Iron Gate. And over there on the far end, you can see the Silver Gate again. All the 3 ground gates were built like this, like a stone box with 2 gateways. The outer gateway had an iron portcullis which could be lifted up and down, and the inner had a heavy reinforced door. If someone was trying to attack the palace, the outer gate would be left open, and when the attackers were in the box, the gate would close behind them, trapping them in here, and then from up above the defenders would pour boiling oil, throw rocks or spears at them. Either way, nasty way to go. That's why this construction is called a man trap. Alright. Next we'll go on. Yeah, the head. This is the head of one of those sphinxes which were destroyed. What an unlikely place to find this. Alright, for you Game of Thrones fans, the alley, the tour there, where happened one thing happened. During the slave uprising in Marine,
I was talking about Game of Thrones.
a slave master was seen running through some alleys early in the morning. He ended up over there where he was surrounded by a bunch of slaves and killed. So, yeah. Now, this alley here, left, right, that's what remains of the Cardo Street, the north-south street. To the right is to the south, towards the Perisel Square, but instead we're going to the left, towards the Northgate.
Are you a Game of Thrones fan?
Oh yeah. It just makes this job more enjoyable. There are tourist guys here who don't watch Game of Thrones, but they still have to talk about it. The Northgate, at least the northern man trap. We had a Game of Thrones scene over here. Come a bit closer, we have another group over there, so I don't want to shout too loud for them. Okay, so this scene could actually be interesting to everyone, not just to the fans. 2 guys, Dario Naharis and Jorah Mormont, were walking and talking here, walking through the man trap and leaving the city of Marine. That scene is just 15 seconds in the show, in the episode, and over here it took 5 days of filming. And what's also funny is, once they leave here, in the next scene they're 15 kilometers up the hill, next to the fortress Klis. That fortress in the past protected us, over here in Split, they protected us from the Ottoman Empire. But in Game of Thrones, the walls and gates of the fortress were used as the walls and gates of Marine. Outside of the Marine. And this was inside of Marine. So one moment here, next moment there. Hollywood magic.
Yeah.
Did you watch any of the filming?
No, I was too lazy for that. But luckily, I don't really like the cold and it was filmed in the winter.
Yes.
The thing is, all the Croatians who auditioned to be extras, they were On average, a bit taller, a bit too tall compared to the actors, main actors. So they could only be the exotic people, the slaves or the slave masters. In the show, they're in the desert in the summer heat, so they're dressed scantily. And imagine wearing just light clothes in the winter. So it wasn't really fun for the people here.
How cold does it get here in the desert?
Well, the coldest week of the winter goes below freezing point, but besides that, it's just above freezing point at the coldest. But we have a northeastern wind called Pura coming from Russia. That makes it feel much colder here than it's supposed to, so that's the reason why we don't have tourists. One of the reasons. Alright. Now let's move on just outside. So, this is the Northgate, the Golden Gate. It's the most decorated of all the gates because this was the Emperor's Gate. When he would come back into the palace, he would pass through here, go straight down the Kimono Street into his home. The gate is really well preserved because it was buried for centuries. In the Middle Ages, people didn't have enough manpower to guard 3 gates, so they closed off and buried the northern and the eastern gate. They only used the western gate, which is why the city expanded towards the west in the 15th century. But later, in the Venetian times, these 2 gates were excavated. This one, though, wasn't excavated completely. The original ground level is actually 6 feet, 2 meters below us. That's why this gate is kind of small compared to the western gate that we've seen. And that's why the walls have battlements added on top of them, to add some height to compensate for the raised ground level. And in those arches you can see how the windows of the palace were closed off. And now,
Just a wonderful tour. Really, really a wonderful tour.
we have Gregory of Nîmes, the biggest statue made by Ivan Meštrović. Gregory was a Croatian bishop who lived in the 10th century. He was the advisor of the first Croatian king, Tomislav, but he is mostly remembered because he defied the Pope. The Pope wanted all the priests and bishops everywhere to only speak Latin in church. But Gregory knew that the common people here, common Croatians, didn't understand Latin, so he would speak Croatian, which is one of the reasons why we are still Croatians. Even though we were oppressed by other countries for centuries, we never had to convert to a different language, because we were able to maintain our own language through church thanks to him. So he is remembered as the father of Croatian language. The statue was originally built on the Peristyle Square in the center of the palace. But in World War II, when the city was occupied by the fascists, they wanted the statue destroyed. The locals, instead of destroying it, they cut the statue into 5 pieces. And you can see how he was cut. They hid the pieces away, and after the war, they rebuilt him over here, which is a much better place for a guy his size. He's holding a Bible and pointing as if to say, remember your language, remember your culture. But when people see him today, they think he's either a wizard casting a spell, or that he's taking a selfie with a tablet. The entire statue is made of bronze, but now it's black, because the bronze is oxidated. The only actual bronze part of the statue is the toe. It's polished because people keep rubbing it. You see, when you rub the toe, you get a free wish. And this is where the short part of the tour ends, with a free wish. So, who was on the long tour? You guys, we can go make a wish and I'll meet you behind the statue.
Okay, so that is the end of the tour, the short tour, if I could tell you. And I think that I will go up and make a wish by rubbing the toe of this famous Croatian here. Let's see. So there is the toe. You see somebody rubbing the toe there. Look at that. So I'm sure we'll get some people rubbing it. Look at that. There they go. Rubbing the toe. So I hope you enjoyed this. Hope you enjoyed this tour here of the palace here in beautiful, beautiful Split, Croatia.